Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
Next, we will hear from Jeffrey Hipolito, Rudolf Steiner's Nietzschean Phenomenology, Philosophy as the Art of Thinking. Dr. Hipolito is the chairperson of the Owen Barfield Society and author of numerous books and papers on Barfield, Coleridge, and anthroposophy.
Okay, first of all, I'd just like to begin by thanking Dan, Matthew, whoever, all the names I don't know. I know it's a lot of tedious, repetitive work to keep everything going, and all the work academics don't like doing, and so thank you. And I'd like to say too, I'd like to thank everybody here. I know at the tail end of a conference, our minds and energy tend to float into the upper atmosphere and blow away with the jet stream. So I really appreciate that everybody's here and grounded and concentrated in this space. So thank you. Okay, so let me jump in here. And first, let me start by saying that I don't want you to have a false impression. I don't plan to give something that has a really tied off beginning, middle, and end, some completed thought. I think it's better thought of as a series of beginnings rather than something whole in that sense. So a series of beginnings. And let me begin by describing how I came to consider this topic. Not quite write a paper, but consider the topic. And so it started with an exercise in Schillerian play and kind of a free play exercise. And I was trying to imagine what it would be like to consider the evolution of consciousness from the point of view of each temperament considered exclusively on its own. So in other words, what would a purely sanguine picture of the evolution of consciousness look like, and so on. And I was kind of going through that series, and I got to the melancholic perspective. And I thought of something that Steiner describes often, namely the unity of in the ancient mysteries, the unity of art, science, and religion, and their gradual disintegration and dispersal throughout the course of human history, so that now we experience them as in opposition or in tension with each other, as unable to survive very well without the company of the other, so that now can we call the sciences proper sciences anymore without the artistic and without a sense of the sacred? What about the arts without any kind of scientific discipline, and so on down the line? So I was just imagining it in this melancholy mood, this total disintegration and collapse and turning to goo of everything apart from everything. Anyway, so that was I'm not very melancholy by nature, but that was the picture I was conjuring up. And yeah, I won't ask any of you if you're a true melancholic and that's accurate or not. I've found that if you ask a melancholic to reveal their melancholy, it's like asking them to reveal their shame. So I'm not going to do that. But I'll quote T.S. Eliot instead, who's kind of epitomizes the melancholy in his early years. And so he was reading it actually as the chapters were published. He was reading James Joyce's Ulysses. And some of you probably know this, that at the end after the book was finally published, it's very controversial, it's banned in various countries and so on. He wrote a very important review of it. And what he got from it was that in a famous quote, he said that one thing he appreciated about it is that it presents a vast panorama of futility and anarchy. And I don't know if you've read Ulysses, but that's not what I get from it. Throughout the last word of the novel is yes, after all. It's like a very affirmative, joyful book. But wow, that's the melancholy reaction. There's something true in it. And I've tried reading it like through Eliot's eyes, and I can see how you would see it that way, but there's also something kind of perverse in the one-sidedness of that response. Anyway, so there I was in my melancholy mood, and I'm imagining this, and I'm reminded of Steiner's frequent descriptions of all of anthroposophy as an attempt in the consciousness soul age to reintegrate art, science, and religion? How can we bring these back in a meaningful, coherent way back into relation with each other? So that was the first thing. And then the second thing I was also kind of playing with, and I have been playing with for a long time, it's a hypothesis, I guess you might say, that one way of thinking about the different aspects of anthroposophy is that each of them is an epitome of the whole of anthroposophy. So in other words, could you derive just from anthroposophical medicine, if you were just to study it deeply enough, could you derive all of anthroposophy from that one domain? Could you do that with eurythmy? Like there's so many different, could you do that with threefolding and so on? There's so many different things where if you were to take that one thing, I've even tried to do this with individual lectures or, the foundation stone meditation. There's so many things you could do where can I, in a way, kind of excavate or extrapolate or unfold the whole of anthroposophy from this one thing. So I thought I would try that with philosophy and see how far I would get. So that's what I'm going to present is how far I got with that. So in other words, can we think of Steiner's philosophical work as, in a way, the epitome of all of anthroposophy? Is it the reincorporation of art and science and religion back into each other in such a way that you could then derive all of anthroposophy from it? I'm not going to do it in 15 minutes. I'm not going to do that. But I'll make a start on some of those things as the best I can. It may be useful even to think of art, science, and religion themselves as epitomized by the Platonic triad of the true, the beautiful, and the good as well. So I'll sometimes use those interchangeably. Okay, so let's get into it then. So first of all, as we think about about philosophy in relation to art, like where can we see this in Steiner's philosophical work? There are lots of ways. Luke Fisher has already given a whole paper on Steiner's philosophy of art. It's a little bit different than philosophy as an art. And so as I thought about this, my mind turned not to the German Romantics or to the idealist tradition or anything like that, but to Nietzsche. And what Steiner has to say about Nietzsche, his descriptions of Nietzsche are very interesting. Some of you, probably most of you, know that Steiner met, if that's the right word, he was physically in the presence of Friedrich Nietzsche after he had gone into his catatonic stupor, I guess I should say, his 10-year embodied journey into the beyond. And so he, in a sense, knew him, and there's a whole complex history there. Now, here's what he had to say about Nietzsche. Well, let me preface that by something that I've slid past many times and never paused on before. At the very beginning of Philosophy of Freedom, now some of you might remember this, Steiner says that philosophy is an art. Now, all real philosophers have been artists in the realm of thinking. And so I've read that and think, oh, that's nice, but I haven't really paused to think very much about what it would mean for there to be an art of thinking. What is that? There's someplace else, I can't remember where exactly, might actually just be Philosophy of Freedom, where he says that philosophy, that the philosopher's material is concepts, and something like that, right? So what is it to have the concept be your artistic material? I think he finds that embodied in Nietzsche. His description of Nietzsche's physical form, right? So standing in his presence. Some of you maybe have seen Nietzsche in those last years as well. His description of Nietzsche is of that marvelously beautiful brow, that of thinker and artist in one, right? So quite amazing. Just Nietzsche's physical form, the form of the head, is both the thinker and the artist. He doesn't look for, if you've read what Steiner has to say about Nietzsche, right? He doesn't look for philosophical consistency from him. He doesn't care about that. Says he contradicts himself all over the place. So what? Doesn't matter. If you've read very much Nietzsche, you will know that he transforms his style. He changes his views all the time. It's quite I've been reading Nietzsche in chronological order, and going through, I'm up to, gosh, what am I up to? I'm up to the genealogy of morals now. So I'm making headway and going through that 20-volume thing. And you will see transformation. He's reinventing himself almost book to book. It's quite remarkable, much less in all of the the notebook entries that he has, where that's his laboratory, and he's really playing. So Nietzsche, as this artist of pure transformation, Steiner describes him as a dithyrambic artist, right? And so what would that mean? Among some other things, the dithyrambic artist is one who engages in Dionysian ecstasis, right? So a kind of surpassing of the self in a certain way into this pure energy, or a submersion of the self, or what Nietzsche will sometimes describe as a going under, right? Do you have the courage to go under? Zarathustra talks about that. Somebody with equal joy and suffering, somebody who gives expression to total human experience beyond the merely logical, conceptual, and affirmation of life and its complexity, will to self-fulfillment and self-realization. Right? So Steiner sees in Nietzsche somebody for whom the motivating forces of human life can be looked for only in the single real personality. He rejects all powers that wish to form and determine the individual personality from outside. And in Steiner's description, he sees him as a very complex figure. On the one hand, striving for freedom constantly. On the other hand, running up against, sometimes Steiner will describe it as running up against the outside world, the exterior world, sometimes running up against his own preconceptions about, and his own dogmas about the fact that there is an external world, that there's something material to run up against, right? So his own kind of metaphysical assumptions. So I think that Nietzsche exemplifies for him something that he mentions on page 1 of Philosophy of Freedom. The practice of living, I'll start to quote here, the fundamental question, is man entitled to claim for himself freedom of will, or is freedom merely an illusion of his inability to recognize the threads of necessity on which his will, like any natural event, depends? And he sees Nietzsche as suspended between these. On the one hand, furiously recreating himself as an exercise of pure freedom, and collapsing again into the very notion, the dogma, you might say, of the natural events, right? And that he himself is a natural event in a certain way. And so all of his thrashing, you might say, all of his attempts to be free are mere naturalistic thrashing in the void, right? So Steiner ultimately sees Nietzsche in kind of a melancholy way, actually, somebody who has a tragic outcome. Nietzsche, he says, seemed to me one of the most tragic figures of that time. Right? So someone who couldn't make it. Okay. And he also, very interestingly, I think very evocatively in his autobiography, Steiner says that at this period, this period of the crisis, he is suspended between Nietzsche and Goethe. Right? So he's not one or the other. He's not going back and forth between the two or feeling like he has to choose between them in some way, but more, it's almost like, for me, like an image on the cross in a certain sense. Like there he is suspended between the two in a kind of polarity. Yeah, okay. I'll come back to Goethe in a second here. But first, okay, so there we have the artist, or the philosopher as artist, in other words, and this pure activity, this striving for freedom, this unwillingness to be contained or be defined in some way, to be categorized in some final way. Okay, so what about the philosopher as scientist? And again, I don't go to any of the German idealists. I'm not going to Hegel or Fichte or any of those people, not even to Goethe, but to Franz Brentano. So another very important figure for Steiner. And Brentano's death in particular affected Steiner greatly. So some of you probably know this memorial essay It's included in Riddles of the Soul. If you've seen that book, it's one that really slides under the surface. I don't know if Cliff is here, but that really needs to be in the collected works published soon. It's, I think Mercury Press is the only one that publishes it right now. Anyway, so it's this important memorial essay about Franz Brentano. And Steiner says there, gosh, where do I want to start? Steiner says there, start with this. Yeah, okay. So first of all, the need to write the essay at all. And here's someone in Brentano that he knew personally. So he attended Brentano's lectures, University of Vienna, not the only one. Edmund Husserl is one of those people. Sigmund Freud is one of those people. There's a whole long list of people who were waiting for his office hours. And so here's what Steiner, who also attended those lectures, had to say about the need to write the essay. Remarkable language, I think. He says, writing it was my deepest need. And if I regret anything about it, it is that I did not write it long ago and could not make the attempt to bring it to Brentano's attention while he still lived. It is only that, although I have been an ardent reader of Brentano's works for a long time, his life's work only appeared before my soul in such a way that I can present its relation to anthroposophy, as is done in this book. The passing of this revered man moved me to relive in thought his life's work. Only from this did my views of his life work reach the provisional conclusions that underlie the discussions in my essay. So 5 minutes, okay. Oh gosh, okay. So language here like his deepest need to write this, that he's been an ardent reader, that Brentano is for him a revered man. Like this is a remarkable language. I don't know how many contemporaries Steiner spoke of in this way. So holding him in the highest estimation, and yet recognizing that Brentano himself would have rejected anthroposophy completely. So he says that he's quite aware of this. He says, on the one hand, from my anthroposophical viewpoint, I am in a position to approach the philosophy of Franz Brentano with unconditional reverence. On the other hand, he says, no one can accuse Brentano's way of picturing things of having even the slightest tendency in an anthroposophical direction. If he himself had had any cause to judge it, he would certainly have rejected it decisively. Right? So unconditional reverence, it's precisely from his anthroposophical point of view that he speaks about the person who would have rejected anthroposophy and so on, all kinds of complex things. And I'll just condense here a bit and say the reason that he's so drawn to Brentano is that Brentano is the first person who's a scientist of the soul in the way that Steiner would recognize. So he's attempting descriptive psychology. He's attempting to describe mental actions purely on their own and not try to talk about them as byproducts of physical processes or getting into a metaphysics of the soul or anything like that. He just wants to limit his vision to, in a purely descriptive way, to what happens when we're engaged in mental activity. At the same time, Steiner felt that he was wrong, essentially, or not quite wrong, that he was misdirected. So, and that he got stuck. And Brentano was well known for having projects he couldn't complete. And he would promise volumes that didn't appear and so on. And Steiner is interested in this, not just interested. He says that it seems to me that Brentano's destiny with respect to his projected publications represents a weighty spiritual scientific problem. Like, why couldn't he write these books? It's a weighty spiritual scientific problem. And the reason is that he also is too drawn into nominalistic, positivistic assumptions. And Brentano is quite admired by the positivists, for example, and in their writings, they include positive references to him. That's not accidental. And so here's somebody who, in his description of the soul, Steiner says, describes imaginative cognition perfectly, but he's attempting to describe embodied normal cognition. So, okay, so there's somebody who's the scientist, but we can't quite get there. And then the last, who I think is probably known the best here for the religious sensibility, it's not a contemporary, but is Goethe. And so in what way is Goethe a representative of the religious? In fact, it's one of the big problems, I think, in Goethe scholarship and trying to understand him is what is his religious perspective? Is he a pantheist? Is he a polytheist? Is he a Masonic Christian? Is he an agnostic? Like what to do? It reminds me of Bertrand Russell has a joke about Unitarianism. I figure I'm at Harvard, I have to have a joke about Unitarianism. And Russell says that he's trying to capture what the Unitarian believes, and he says, I think they believe in one God at the most. And you might say something about similar about Goethe, like what does he believe? But here's why he's a representative of the religious path or the spiritual. In the 1923 preface to Theory of Knowledge Implicit in Goethe's Worldview, Steiner says that as a theory of knowledge, it seems to form the basis and justification for everything I have said and published since then. It discusses a way of knowing that opens a path from the sensory world into a spiritual one. And that might remind you of the definition of anthroposophy that Steiner gives in the letters or the leading thoughts, the anthroposophical leading thoughts, where he says that anthroposophy is the attempt to integrate the spiritual and the individual into the spiritual and the cosmos, right? So this is what's happening in Goethe's path of knowledge, is precisely this anthroposophical path of a reintegration into the cosmos. And then just as a couple of, I think probably have 1 minute. Yeah, so just really quickly, I wouldn't plan to emphasize on what we already know about Goethe's theory of knowledge as Steiner presents it and so on, but I would want to highlight for your attention that Goethe's worldview, this is Steiner here, Goethe's worldview is the most multifaceted imaginable. It proceeds from a central point that lies in the unified nature of the poet, and it always brings out that aspect corresponding to the nature of the object under discussion. And the key phrase for me there, the one that jumps off the page, is the unified nature of the poet. Like why, when he's talking about Goethe the scientist, Goethe who's offering a theory of knowledge, why is it the poet who leaps to the center, and it's the unified nature of the poet? I have an answer, which I don't have time to give to that question, so I think it's better to have it be a mystery anyway. But I will say that I think this is in this, it's in the same preface. Steiner says that the sensory world, when correctly perceived, manifests everywhere as a revelation of the spiritual. In the light of this true knowledge of the sensory world, I saw clearly that the boundaries of knowledge, as then defined, could exist only for those who cannot know what lies beyond the physical world. Just as someone might insist that a page of printed words is impossible to decipher merely because one has not taken the time to learn the form of the letters. Now, this is the Book of Nature, topos, that's so well known. And I'll just close with the question for you, whether that book, the Book of Nature, is a treatise to be read literally or a poem to be read imaginatively. Thank you.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, Preston Fellows of Harvard College.